Hygienic sale. Get extra equipment at no extra cost. That's right, extra equipment at no extra cost only at Bruce Chevrolet Geo. Extra inventory means extra selection. Extra selection means extra savings for you. That's why we say hurry in for this extra special sale only at Bruce Chevrolet Geo in Hillsboro, where we try harder to be number one.
Glasses, you need them, you want them now. Not those overpriced nerdy jobs like your mom picks out. You want the glasses you want at the lowest price. No problem. Not one, two pair, $49.99. Lenses included. Soft contacts, got them. One pair, $49.99. The name, America's Best. Contacts or two pair of eyeglasses, $49.99. And we'll throw in an eye exam, okay? Relax. America's Best. Contacts and eyeglasses. Okay, you get the idea.
You're watching Home TV, Channel 6.
Today on Face the Nation, after another tough week, the president calls his top advisors in for a rare Sunday strategy session. And a bizarre pre-dawn accident off the New York coast as a freighter with 300 aboard runs aground. It was about 2 o'clock this morning when that ship hit a sandbar, and almost half the passengers, believed to be illegal immigrants, jumped over the side. We'll have details in a moment. And for details on that strategy session, which got underway at 9 this morning at the White House, we'll talk to one of the participants, Treasury Secretary Lloyd Bentsen. Then we'll broaden the discussion of the week's events, including the president's controversial decision to withdraw the nomination of Lonnie Guinier to the Justice Department, with 2 members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Republican Orrin Hatch and Democrat Patrick Leahy, and Georgetown University law professor Patricia King.
Face the Nation with Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
And thanks again for joining us. We want to start this morning by bringing you up to date on the ship that ran aground about 2 o'clock this morning in the Atlantic, just off Rockaway Beach in the Queensboro section of New York. The ship, which appeared to be an old freighter, had at least 250 people on board, most of them apparently illegal immigrants believed to be Chinese. When the ship struck a sandbar, many of the passengers began jumping over the side or going down rope ladders in an attempt to swim to shore. At least 2 of them are known dead. At least 24 others have been taken to New York hospitals, many of them suffering from exposure. Many apparently did make it to shore on their own. Local residents reported that some Asians came to their doors offering money to use the phone. Others have been taken into custody by immigration authorities, but search and rescue operations have been continuing through the morning. Some of the officials in New York said later this morning that the boat may have run aground on purpose to allow the immigrants to swim ashore. We will keep you posted if other developments on this story occur. And now joining us here in our Washington studio, Treasury Secretary Lloyd Bentsen, who has come directly from the White House. And I assume, Mr. Secretary, you came just to give us a report on what happened at that strategy session. Tell us, in all seriousness, what did take place at this session this morning?
Well, Bob, I left that meeting and may be going back to that meeting if it's still going on after this is finished. But what we were talking about was the reconciliation package as it comes forth in the Senate. That kind of work that we will be doing with the leadership of the United States Senate and the chairman of the Finance Committee and in turn the members of that committee. We're talking about one of those things being the BTU tax. We believe there'll be some moderation in that, some lessening of the tax, both for manufacturers and for private individuals. On the other hand, that has to be matched with further spending cuts because we don't want to lose sight of the $500 billion worth of reduction that we're talking about in the deficit.
Well, now, you hinted earlier this week when you were in Moscow and you did an interview, and you said that you might be willing to cut back that tax as much as, a third or a fourth?
Well, a third or a fourth, but of course that depends on what the Finance Committee wants to do in the Senate.
Well, now, let me just interrupt you. Did the president sign off on a reduction of that size this morning?
No kind of a commitment like that. Until you talk to the leadership over there and to the Finance Committee members as to what they think would be appropriate in that regard. But my anticipation is that you're going to see some lessening of that tax, some further simplification of that tax, and in turn, further cuts in spending. As you know, we have balanced the spending cuts off against the tax increases.
Well, could you envision, Mr. Secretary, something on the order of shifting part of the revenue that you would gain from a BTU tax to say, something like increasing a tax at the pump on gasoline? Is that one of the things that's being considered? That's what's being talked about all week here in Washington.
Let me say that we looked at all of the options that we could possibly think of before. Amongst those options that we looked at before was a gasoline tax. But there is not regional balance in that one. In some parts of the country, it becomes quite punitive and a disproportionate effect on the consumers. That's particularly true of those states that have substantial rural areas or don't have extensive mass transit.
Well, does that mean then that's out? No increase in the gasoline tax?
These decisions have to be made finally by the two congressional bodies and then approved or disapproved by the president. But I would say that that was one that we did not feel had a proportional effect across the entire United States.
Let me go back to the first thing you said. You are, it appears to me, talking about reducing revenue that would have been generated by a BTU tax from a fourth to a third. You said earlier in this week that might be one of the things under consideration.
That's right. And
clearly that's what you're talking about this morning, and that's what you're going to the Senate with to see if they could go for something like that.
Well, we will confer with them and then decide on what that recommendation should be. But it has to be balanced with a further cut in spending. And we're insistent on that to get to the 500 because...
Where do you do that, Mr.
Well,
Secretary?
let me say, I want to make this point, though, because when we did this and what we've accomplished thus far has reduced the interest rates, you know, to the lowest level in some 20 years. And you're seeing an uptick in home building. You're seeing some very conservative organizations like the home builders who've come on very strong in support of this because it's helped stimulate the economy and created a lot of jobs.
Let me just sort of take your temperature on a couple of specifics. What about higher premiums for upper income people who are retired when it comes to paying their Medicare? Should people in the upper income brackets pay more for Medicare than they're paying now?
Well, those are among the many options that have been considered. That has not been put into the proposal, to my knowledge.
But would that be something that might be considered now?
When you talk about options, we look at an entire array. We're not trying to specify to that degree for the committee.
All right, let me talk about one other feature that's in the tax bill as it's now structured, and that is, if I understand it, it is retroactive back to January 1st of this year. Would the administration, some have suggested perhaps one way to make this more palatable would to make it, it wouldn't take effect until next year.
Well, let me say it's not retroactive. We put that out at the very beginning, and you saw a number of people that actually took income in 92 that they would otherwise taken in 93 in anticipation of what we had already cited that we were trying to do. Obviously, you consider these options as you look at the economy and see if it's moving or not, if it's encouraging. If it's a laggard, then you give some consideration to that, but no determination like that has been made.
So that could happen?
Well, it could, but it has not, and that determination has not been made as you evaluate how the economy is progressing.
Another thing that's been mentioned is perhaps cutting back or eliminating entitlements for illegal aliens.
Well, I know what you're talking about. You're running into a situation of care for those illegal aliens in hospitals along the border where we border Mexico. And the question of assisting those areas in taking care of that obligation, one that was brought about by a Supreme Court decision. I think that would be a very difficult one to cut back on because they look on it that as not their problem, but a federal problem because of the Supreme Court decision.
Senator Boren, who was one of the main opponents of the BTU tax and who, although he said last Sunday on this broadcast he thought the chances of getting a compromise on this bill were now 100% better than they were, says again this week that he simply can't accept a bill that has the BTU tax in it. What are you going to do with Senator Boren?
Well, I must say, Senator Boren is a friend of mine. I have a high regard for him, and he said many things about this that can have different interpretations. But I would hope that when we finally get this package put together, that he will be supportive of it. I'll tell you this, that we're going to get it to the Senate floor, whether it comes through the Finance Committee or not. And I would prefer it comes through the Finance Committee. I'm sure he would, and I'm sure that the chairman would. and we're going to get a vote on the floor of the Senate, and I'm confident we're going to win that vote, because the alternative is one. If you don't pass this, then you're going to see policy in disarray. You cannot pass an alternative to this. You know, you tried a Republican measure, and that was defeated 3-1 in the House, and over 40 Republicans voted against that one. Senator Mitchell says if the Bourne amendment went to the floor, it would not get 10 votes. And what you would see, if this failed, you'd see an immediate uptick in interest rates. We have a fragile recovery going now. You'd have the serious danger of dropping back into a recession and the loss of jobs. And I don't think any senator wants that on his conscience.
Let's talk about what happened in Texas yesterday. The Republican candidate, Kay Bailey Hutchison, won in what could most charitably be described as a blow-up. She may get 70% of the vote, I'm told, before it's over. There's no way that this cannot be seen, Mr. Secretary, as at least a comment or perhaps a referendum on the Clinton administration. That's your seat that she's just won.
Well, let's look at that.
All right.
You saw both candidates campaigning strongly against the budget reconciliation bill. Senator Kruger even voted against it. You saw him campaigning across the state against the B2U tax, as she was. So there was no difference on that one. That was not the issue that was involved. I happen to think Senator Kruger, who's a personal friend of mine and a very able person, was a good senator. But as he himself admitted, he's a poor politician, and that showed up in this particular race. That's the bottom line.
Senator Dole said just this morning it is going to send shockwaves through the Senate, this victory down there. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't, because, again, both of the candidates were opposing the president's budget reconciliation and the B2U tax. There was no difference in that regard.
Mr. Secretary, you've been around Washington a long time. I want to ask you, what do you make of the administration at this point? What has gone wrong with the Clinton White House? Even people who support the president and support the goals he is seeking, saying, my goodness, he's just going about it in a terrible way. Well, what's happened over there?
Let me tell you, any time that you're going to try to cut the deficit by $500 billion, that means you're going to take some very tough political calls. That means you're going to have all kinds of interest groups hard against you. I've seen some of these studies that they have funded, and these public interests have hired themselves some political guns, so to speak, hired guns, and they put out all kinds of propaganda against this president. But we've seen for 12 years no president has had the political courage to take on this kind of an issue, and there is a political cost in the process. But it's absolutely critical for our country to turn this economy around and get these interest rates down and stimulate the economy and create jobs again and cut that deficit back.
Let me ask you one more question, and that is Ross Perot. We have had just the other day on this broadcast, Bill Kristol, who used to be Vice President Quayle's chief of staff, said, it's about time that people in both parties took on Ross Perot. He said, I can't understand why Republicans don't take him on. Is it time for the president to take on Ross Perot, or do you consider his comments helpful?
I think what the president has to do is continue to push hard in getting this budget reconciliation through, talking about changing the economic future of this country. You see, the entire world almost is in recession today, and we by ourselves cannot lead the entire world to recovery. But what we're doing in our international relations now is to get a cooperative effort for growth, to get a reduction of interest rates in Europe, to get the Japanese to stimulate their economies, to create jobs there and demand for our products. And with that, we'll prosper together. But it means, and they admire the fact, that we have a president that will take on this kind of a task for deficit reduction.
I think I mentioned the name Ross Perot somewhere back in that question. Did you avoid that by design, or did you?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Secretary, our time is up. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. When we come back, our roundtable.
This portion of Face the Nation is sponsored by Siemens. For leading-edge technologies in electronic and electrical engineering, depend on Siemens precision thinking. And by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, supermarket to the world.
$18.91. Siemens creates apprentice programs to give people the unique skills to build the world's finest precision technology. That was then. This is now. Today in America, Siemens' new training programs prepare a high-tech workforce to handle today's most advanced technologies, like high-quality automation systems to help American industry meet the challenge of the 21st century. Siemens, precision thinking.
Look what ADM Research has cooked up. An all-vegetable patty that contains dietary fiber, is low in fat, and free of cholesterol. One that's made to meet the demands of vegetarians and other health-conscious consumers. It's the Midland Harvest brand Harvest Burger. And so far, it's made a big impression everywhere it's landed. ADM, supermarket to the world.
And joining us now to talk about the week in Washington, Professor Pat King, Georgetown University, Pat Leahy, Senator, Democratic Senator from Vermont, Orrin Hatch, Republican Senator from Utah, the two senators, both members, of course, of the Judiciary Committee. Let's get right to topic one in Washington this week, and that is the president's withdrawal of Lani Guinier to be an official in the Justice Department. Was the president justified in doing that, Senator Leahy?
Well, I think yes. Short answer, of course he's justified. He can nominate whomever he wants.
Should he have done it?
And he can withdraw whomever he wants. I think he was faced with the possibility there's going to be a very long, very protracted fight that was going to totally distract from two of the more important things he's going to have up. One, the budget, and secondly, his nominee for the Supreme Court, which we all expect within the next few days.
Did he do the right thing, Senator Hatch?
There's no question in my mind he did the right thing. If you read her writings, they're very provocative, very interesting. She's clearly a very bright woman and probably a very fine law professor, but they were really outside of what really would have been fairness and equity under our current law.
Does this help him or hurt him from here on in the Senate?
Well, I don't think it does either. I think he had to make a decision as a president. I would have preferred to have allowed her to testify before the committee and at least give her day before the committee or days before the committee. She wanted that. She was nominated. It would have been a good thing. On the other hand, I'm not going to second-guess the president who has to make these decisions.
Professor King, would you like to second-guess the president? Because I have been told that Lani Guinier was, that you were something of a mentor to her.
Well, I'd like to think that I was a mentor, but I think after watching her performance this week, she's readjusted the relationship. I'm just in awe of her courage and her integrity and her plea to be treated fairly, as I think she was not. And I think that the president shot himself in the foot this week in many ways, and we'll see if he recovers. He shot himself in the foot because he said, this is not a move to the political center. This is a judgment on my center. I think he was right. And those of us who watched him judged his center. We didn't see anything there. I think he made a mistake because he exposed what we're all concerned about, inadequacies in the White House. But he made a fundamental mistake in thinking that those of us in the African-American community are going to forget it.
Do you believe the president? Perhaps that's not the way to phrase this. I'll just say this. The president said that he did not read what she had written. He had not read her writings. Do you take that statement at face value?
No, because I would not expect a president of the United States to have to read the writings of a person that he would nominate. I expect his staff to be able to do that and his staff to be able to advise him well. In her case, I would have thought, as I think, that having known Lani Guinier for 20 years, that he knew enough about her as a person, her character, her integrity. He knew she was no radical. We all know she was no radical. We all know that he really did pick one of the best and the brightest. This is a young woman who speaks, despite what the writers claim, with moderation and healing.
One thing should be added in here, Bob, irrespective of whether she was the best person or not the best person for it. Unfortunately, we are seeing over the past few years a very disturbing trend where a nominee, if a nominee is at all controversial, the debate goes on long before that nominee is ever heard before the Senate. You have interest groups on the left or interest groups on the right who come in either for or against the person. That happened here. I know that the Lani Guinier I met with in my office was a lot different than the Lani Guinier I saw portrayed in the press. And at some point, we've got to get this where we hear the nominee, not the interest groups for or against the nominee.
But there's something very important here. She would have administered the Voting Rights Act. She called for cumulative voting, concurrent majorities, minority vetoes, quotas with regard to selection of judges. There were a lot of things that were quite radical. And this isn't just some conservative talking. People like Stuart Taylor, Marty Schramm, the New Republic, all condemned what she was advocating. Clearly a very bright professor, but the fact is, if she administered the Voting Rights Act, she could administer the pre-clearance provisions. In other words, anytime she wanted to stop down any type of a voting system in any state, all she had to do was just refuse to pre-clear. That state would be limited to going to court at a cost of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Then under Section 2, she could have imposed all kinds of these ideas on America right out of that position. You cannot put somebody, though intelligent and likable and very bright, into that position who is going to administer it without fairness, in a way that leads to quotas, in a way that leads to proportional representation, unjustified proportional representation, and her writings indicated that. The problem with Lonnie Guinier was not that her writings were caricatured. The problem is that they read her writings. People read her writings. And when the president finally did, he said, my gosh, I didn't realize that she was this radical. And she was. And that's the reason.
Do you want to respond to that, Ms. King?
There's so many things to say. First of all, I have not read all of her writings, but I have read some of her writings. And I think that her writings were misinterpreted and mischaracterized. She herself has said that they were ponderous and dense with many footnotes. I'm a law professor. I know we write those kinds of things. That is, in fact, the problem. But it's not just that she was bright and smart and intelligent. I think the president had to know, as those of us who have worked with her know, that we are talking about a person who cares deeply about this country, who believes in democracy, who wants to heal a very nasty, long-running issue in our country. We'd like to believe this is one world, but race is still alive and well and active. The lead story in the Washington Post this morning talks about racism and mortgage financing. Secret Service agents to the president allege they can't even get served in restaurants. She is the person who wanted to try to pull us together. Yes, she would have been at the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, but she would have been subject to Janet Reno. She would have been subject to the president's policies on civil rights, and she understood that.
I want to move on because I want to ask about the Supreme Court nominee, but let me just ask you this. I mean, how do you know? I mean, she would have been under Janet Reno, but you're talking about a person here that the president nominated for an office and then refused to withdraw her name. How could the president count on someone who would take that posture, Ms. King, or is that an unfair statement to make?
I would never say you were unfair. Let me put it this way. If you're a candidate of the president and the president has selected you, I think candidates can expect that absent fraud, criminal activity, some illegal position, that once nominated, that your president will stand behind you. And in her case, particularly in her case, where the president knew what kind of person she was, to be treated the way she was treated, left to hang out to dry, I think she was left with no choice except to salvage her own reputation and her own standing, which I think she did beautifully.
All right, let's talk about the Supreme Court. The reports are that the president is on the verge of naming Bruce Babbitt, his Secretary of the Interior, to the court. You like that?
Well, he's from the West, and Bruce was a neighboring governor to our state. He's now Secretary of the Interior. He's created some sort of a set of controversies while Secretary of the Interior. I'd have to wait and see. What really worries a lot of people on our side, and I think some on the Democrat side, is that when you pick a political person rather than a sitting judge, and there are some eminent jurists who would go through the Senate just very quickly and would be excellent Supreme Court justices, even though I don't personally agree with their philosophies. When you pick a political person, they're worried sick about that political person being an activist judge, imposing that political person's ideas, visceral ideas of what's right or wrong in the law, rather than applying the law itself.
So you haven't signed off on this one yet. Let me ask you something, because one report is that the president is worried that he wants to do a Babbitt, he wants to nominate him, but he's worried about who should be the Secretary of the Interior to replace him. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is this. When you look at the Supreme Court, you know which president appointed each member of the Supreme Court. Go down and look at the list of Secretaries of the Interior. You can rarely match the president up with that. This is a far more important appointment. If he likes Bruce Babbitt, he ought to appoint Bruce Babbitt. there will be a dozen very well qualified candidates for Secretary of the Interior. This, for the history books, is far, far more important, and I think that it would be a good choice.
All right. We have to end it there. I want to thank all of you for being here. Back with the final word in just a moment.
At Ford Motor Company, we're already building vehicles that meet California's strict emission standards for the late 90s. We're the first U.S. manufacturer to build a car with CFC-free air conditioning. And we'll soon have a fleet of electric vehicles on the road. For us, designing quality cars and trucks means keeping an eye on the big picture.
At Ford, we understand that the quality of the environment is one of our greatest responsibilities.
Ford Motor Company, quality is job one. It's working.
Retirement years should be secure years. That's why Merrill Lynch has a gerontologist to help us understand the social, emotional, and financial needs these years bring. That extra insight can make a difference between seeking security and finding it. The difference is Merrill Lynch.
Something is terribly wrong with these pictures, but you could look all day and not see it. The problem is carbon monoxide, an invisible, deadly pollutant emitted in auto exhaust. Fortunately, there's a way to help reduce these emissions. Ethanol, a renewable fuel derived from corn grown by the American farmer. And now, for the first time ever, the Clean Air Act requires ethanol and other oxygenated fuels to be used in 39 of the nation's most polluted cities during the winter months. When this program was tested in Denver in 1988, atmospheric levels of carbon monoxide dropped 8% in the first 2 months, and they're still dropping. No wonder it became a model for cleaning up the air in cities all over the country. The problem of carbon monoxide may be invisible, but the solution is becoming clearer every day.
It looks like a resort, but the guests who show up each day aren't coming to get away. Pull into the biggest truck stop in the world tomorrow on CBS This Morning with Harry Smith and Paula Zahn.
Well, that's it for us here. Later today, Edie Magnus will have the latest on that freighter aground off New York City and all of the stories on tonight's Sunday Evening News. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you here next week on Face the Nation.
A new chapter has begun in Merrill Lynch's history in Asia. We are the first American securities firm invited to open an office in mainland China. Being there gives our financial consultants a different perspective, which makes a difference for our clients.
The following is a Channel 2 editorial.
Politics and political campaigning cost too much, which is why campaign finance reform is creeping through Congress and state legislatures everywhere. Oregon's campaign finance reform bill made it out of the Senate by a good margin a month ago. Promising as it seemed at the time, the bill is now undergoing radical surgery in a House committee. The problems with campaign finance reform are really simple. Too much money is raised in return for too many promises made to deliver too much influence and perhaps even votes for too many special interest groups. It's a pity the candidates are now commonly chosen on the basis of how easy they are to sell instead of the quality of leadership they might bring to their office. In Oregon, if one candidate raises more money than needed, they simply dispose of it by passing it on to another candidate who isn't selling. If you outspend your opponent, you have a good chance of winning an election. If the Oregon House only denies its big money raisers the ability to pass money on to losers who seem to be able to buy their way into office, then they'll have taken one of the most important first steps towards campaign reform in Oregon. I'm Rick Myers.
If you would like to respond to this editorial, write feedback, KATU, Post Office Box 2, Portland, Oregon, 97207.